So we'll get right into it, starting with the topic of enforcement. And this is going to be a question for the panel. What specific issues could arise with the implementation of the 80/20 provision, and how might this impact the home care industry? On the other side of that, what positive outcomes could potentially arise from this ruling? And Jeff, we'll start with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. First of all, glad to be here. Appreciate this conversation. I think this is going to be the one of many conversations going to be around this particular topic. At the end of the day, I think there's going to be a lot going into enforcement. If anybody read the joint HCOA and NOC comments that were submitted to CMS during the comment period, you know that there is going to be a very difficult time dealing with this rule on a state-by-state basis because there are so many unique differences in the way that our HCBS is reimbursed from state to state and the unique rule set that each state is operating on independently from each other that doesn't necessarily lend itself well to a one size fits all. And of course, that's been our argument from the very beginning that hey, this is something that doesn't match a one size fits all concept. But in the more than 1,000-page decision that was pushed out by CMS on this rule, they offered a variety of, I'll call it case study work that they did on a state by state basis. And they used just a few examples of a few states on how this could operate. Where I think this is going to be, this is going to run afoul of the state Medicaid programs. Is it's essentially the federal government saying this is how you need to enforce, this is how you need to go about reimbursing. And the federal government doesn't actually have the power to change the budget of a state. So how the states respond to this is going to really inform how enforcement is going to take place. And we may find something that ranges all the way from flat out refusal to implement, or kind of a we as the state are not going to enforce this all the way through full implementation. And I think that we're going to see some unique differences continue from state to state. So depending upon where you're located, I really feel like this is not a finished, polished product yet. I know that's a lot, and there's a lot more to unpack there, but I want to make sure that everybody else has an opportunity to respond as well.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Mr. Tweed, your thoughts.
Hitchhiking on what Jeff said, I think that because this is a state program and every state is a little bit different, it creates all kinds of issues. And we shift that then to looking at the impact on home care companies. And I think it's going to impact small companies differently than medium-sized companies, differently than large companies. It's going to have an impact on how the states reimburse for Medicaid. And of course, many states are going to Medicaid managed care. And so we bring in the managed care organizations. And then we still have 20 states with no licensure. And so we have a whole bunch of home care companies out there that aren't licensed by their states, but they have to register with the state and go through the approval process to serve the Medicaid program. And so you put all of these pieces together and it gets to be a really complex issue. And then we start looking at the impact. And obviously the biggest impact for most companies is going to be on the bottom line, really on their gross margins. And what will that do? Remember that this rule is called the Ensuring Access to Medicaid Services Rule. And as we talk about this, how will all of these issues affect access to care? And I think many of us see it as having a negative aspect on access to care, not a positive influence on aspect to care. So it'll be very interesting. And as Jeff said, many more discussions to come.
Fair enough. Thank you, Stephen. Let's go to John.
Yeah, so a study that I read recently estimated that if this went into effect today in the state of Pennsylvania alone, about 30% of clients currently receiving home care through non-medical services that we provide would lose services. So 30% of a pretty large population, Pennsylvania is one of the larger states when it comes to seniors receiving home care, would be It's just not, it'd be devastating to those individuals, and it doesn't make sense. It can't happen, to be honest. So what I expect, if you talk about Medicare, everyone understands for the most part, Medicare, when you're 65, there's Medicare, you get services from Medicare. Medicaid really isn't been at the forefront of people's minds yet in our country's history. Because this is rolled out, I think this is actually going to cause a lot of individuals, both in the private level and at the state level and federal level, to really put an emphasis on figuring this out. We know we have this caregiver crisis that's already happening, especially since COVID with the workforce. We know that we have just the tidal wave of baby boomers, right? The first one's turning 78 this year. There has to be an emphasis put on figuring out how to provide care for these individuals as our country ages. And I think the positive, you asked about what's a positive outcome from this, it's going to put the spotlight on this, and we have to figure out how to make it work. We can't have people not get the care that they need, right? There's not enough beds and facilities. That's where we come in. We provide care for people in their homes. This has to get figured out jointly between individuals like you all on the call, and state agencies and federal agencies. There's got to be a solution to it, because if not, the other option just isn't, it's not feasible.
No, fair enough. Thank you. All right, we'll hand it over to Ari.
Good afternoon, everyone. Maybe good morning on the West Coast. When I look at this rule, I see this as a utter failure of imagination and problem solving, both certainly on the side of policymakers, first and foremost. Yes, there's a problem with caregiver wages. Yes, there's a problem with the number of caregivers and direct care workers we have in this country. That this is the solution that smart people could come up with is mind-boggling to me. And I equate it, I think we need to look to other industries to see what, there's historical precedent. Not exact, but you look at California and the mandate around fast food workers getting a $20 minimum wage. Well, what's happened? September to March, 10% price increases. Since, this mandate went into effect, a bunch of businesses gone out of business. So I don't think it's going to be a surprise when there are a lot of negative consequences if this goes into play. We also have to take some responsibility as an industry for a lack of imagination around how to raise caregiver wages and how to attract new people into our workforce and provide better jobs. So it ain't all on policymakers. This is also where capitalism needs to step up and do its job. And we need more innovation. We need different models, whether that's in the private pay world, whether that's in Medicaid or other third-party payers. We can't just say that this is all the fault of CMS or policymakers, because if we were doing our jobs, we might not have some of the same issues. What good could come from this? I'll give you a minor one, and then the more major one relates to what I just said. The minor one, I'd like to think that states could set their Medicaid rates a bit more, in a bit tighter of a band. I mean, I have seen some states like my home state of North Carolina, historically, South Carolina, where the Medicaid bill rate they are paying mandates a poverty wage rate for caregivers. And that is inexcusable. And take even the 80-20 out of it, just right now, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it's pathetic and it's wrong. I've seen other states where I've seen investment memos, and I've seen Medicaid, non-medical home care companies that have 30 and 35% EBITDA margins. And if I were a state legislator, if I were a state taxpayer in those states, I wouldn't be too happy about that either. So I do think that there's some very big variance between where states are currently setting their bill rates, that again, maybe there's space for a more realistic band for everybody. On the even more positive side, a more hopeful side, again, does this push us all to explore new models, to think about ways to bill for home care that are not just dollar per hour? Because at the end of the day, we're not going to solve these big issues with federal mandates like this. We're not going to solve it by fighting federal mandates like this. We're going to solve it by new models of care.
Thank you, Ari. Appreciate that. All right, Mr. Stapleton.
Yeah, thanks, Jensen. Ari took a decent amount of what I was going to say. So, good. I mean, no, these are all great points. And I think from my standpoint, some of our listeners might go, why is a private pay guy, on a 80-20 conversation? And it's quite simply because I think as a private pay individual, I've been saying this for years, we have to speak up for our brothers and sisters who are in the Medicaid realm. And what I've been saying is we need to speak up regarding the reimbursement rates. And I think if I'm looking at things that will come out of this that will improve the industry, the care, the access for care, I think when we look back on this, hopefully it will increase the reimbursement rates, which will allow providers, Medicaid and non-Medicaid, to increase the rates in which they pay. And Ari, brought up a great point that if you are running off of models that are industry wide, where they say, if you are billing this, you need to pay this percentage because you have these overheads, and this new model doesn't allow most of what we have been learning. And so we both have to relearn it, but I think we also have to advocate for individuals that aren't us in the private pay model to help the entire industry.
Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate it. All right, Mr. Foxhoven, thoughts?
Well, there's so much that's been already said that I was already thinking about, similar to Aaron. So, but a few things just to dovetail off of, like Jeff said, the one size fits all. We're in Nebraska. We are one of the 20 states that Steven said that we are the Wild West. There is no licensure here, which when I was smaller, I thought was a good thing. Now I realize that that's a problem. We need to be a part of that. But there is no one size fits all, and that's what they're trying to accomplish with this. I love the overall thought process of how do we come together as a industry, as part of our government officials, to solve the caregiver problem and to get better caregiver wages. I do agree, and it was something that took me a little while to kind of wrap my head around, but with John, I think this could be long-term a good thing for our industry. It's shining a light on our industry, period. And that was a discussion, I hate to go back to our COVID time, but I've talked to so many people where COVID actually helped us because it showed that we were here. We were an option. We were something other than nursing homes and things like that. And so this is just another opportunity for us to show that we're here, we exist, and come together, like Ari said, and solve this problem, and not let some of the bureaucrats solve it and come up with our ways and bring that there. So this could be a good thing in the end. At first I was a little scared, but I think we'll work through it.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Mr. Hargrove, thoughts?
Well, lots of thoughts. Sort of to piggyback off what Stephen pointed out, is the title of the rule itself is to increase access to care, and it's going to do the complete opposite, especially for rural providers like Abrio, my company. We started in rural Arizona. We continue to serve rural Arizona. I think you don't get the economy of scale that you get in an urban environment when you're a rural provider. And so it'll significantly change the way we do business. I think as it relates to private duty, Medicaid companies are going to focus heavily on converting to more and more private duty. So to Aaron's point, I think it's going to increase competition. And I think people will be playing, since Medicaid providers have had to work on smaller margins for a long time, they're going to come in and attempt to undercut private duty pay rates for the private duty competition. And I think it's going to significantly impact the private duty market if a significant number of Medicaid providers switch over to that service line. And so that's a point. I don't know how valid it is, but it's a point of thought anyway. You know, the topic is enforcement, and I'm sitting here thinking to myself, how really will this be enforced? The point's already been made that it's not a level playing field. All the states operate differently. You know, in Arizona, the MCOs, it's a managed care state, and we're actually on a different waiver. So I don't know, I'm sure they will address that technical difference quite quickly, because we're on an experimentation waiver and they're going to say, oh, no, it applies to you too. Anyway, you know, our MCOs like to keep 10 or 15% right off the top. And so how does that play into the calculation? And so there's a lot of things to consider as it relates to the topic of enforcement. So again, we have more questions than answers, and it'll probably be that way for years and years before, as we migrate through this. We're at the baby step stages of this.
Appreciate the feedback. Thank you, Rick.